Nighttime workers of Reddit, what's the freakiest stuff you've seen on the job? Train inspector here, walking a train in the middle of the night, pitch black, come up to a freight car that had 4 hobos sitting in it, just staring at me. Dudes never said a word, just watched me. I eased by them, and kept going, but couldn't get past the feeling of them behind me for a good while. I worked nights at a dog kennel. During the night we just walked the dogs around the parking lot so they could go to the bathroom. The parking lot was surrounded by a wooded area on most sides. There was a stray cat colony living in the woods behind the parking lot. Every time I'd walk a dog through the parking lot the cats would sprint away and hide in the woods. They did not like the dogs at all, they were terrified of them. One night I'm walking a dog and I see the cats, but this time they're sprinting out of the woods toward me. All the cats just kind of gather in the middle of the parking lot, completely ignoring the barking dog I had. It definitely freaked me out. What was out in the woods that scared the cats out so much that they came running towards me and a dog they were usually terrified of? It was probably just a few coyotes or something, but it felt really creepy wondering what was scaring the cats so badly just out of view in the woods. Was standing topside watching the Navy at sea on a dark night when the sky suddenly turned bright. For about 3 seconds something was incoming so bright it lit all the weather decks up like daylight. This caused quite a commotion in the bridge and operations. We were forward deployed during wartime, although not in a region where active fighting was expected. Obviously everyone's worry was that we might be under attack. Then the sky went dark again just as suddenly as it had began. The only one on the ship who had a direct view was me. It's a meteor. Had to repeat that report with details a bunch of times until people calmed down. The thing broke up into 3 pieces and then vaporized in the atmosphere. It was possibly one of the southern Taurids, right time of year, right part of the globe, and that meteor shower is known for producing fireballs. Being hundreds of nautical miles out on a moonless night, it was truly spectacular. That was far and away the most dramatic meteor I've witnessed both in terms of the show it put on and in terms of the context. Lucky coincidence to be an astronomy buff standing the right watch at the right moment. I grew up on a farm. One night I was supposed to check the irrigation pumps at 2 a.m. It's a 2-mile drive and I am mostly asleep. I park the truck with the lights aimed at the river. When I get out the headlights are projecting my shadow on rapid layers of fog coming from the river. Above that the fog was dissipating into the wildest northern lights display I've ever seen. It was like a sheet being violently shook from one horizon to the other. The farm has no sound or noise pollution, there was nothing else to obscure it. The northern lights have a sound, it's like sand on rough paper. So I took several moments to just take in my silhouette was joined visually to green mist across the sky that filled my vision and my ears. I was working overnight at a hotel and a guy came in with a hooker, super confidently pours out a little pile of coke on the counter and tells me it's his payment for a room. He was more surprised than anyone should have been when it didn't work. I'm a nurse, so I see a lot of freaky stuff working days at the hospital as well, but I used to work nights. There's a common phenomenon amongst dementia patients called sundowning. A dementia patient can be sweet and innocent all day, but once night falls they do a complete 180 and become agitated and often hostile. Also, more patients die on night shift for some reason. They always seem to want to crash around 3 a.m. My great-grandfather had sundowners. During the day he was perfectly lucid, remembered who people were, even called my grandmother all the time. When the sun went down he thought he was living in a hotel in Boise in 1939. My greatest fear is that I'm not actually doing this right now. I'm reliving 2020 from a rest home somewhere in 2050. Not specific to working night shift, but dead people. I work in a nursing home and unfortunately people dying is the name of the game. Sometimes you see people declining so you know they're on their way out, and you do 15-minute checks on them and catch it fairly quickly. Other times people seem fine and they just go and you don't find them for an hour or so between doing rounds. I worked as an engineer in Denver. Unfortunately being security detail came with the job considering the hours 2 p.m. to 11 p.m. I was doing rounds and we had noticed the previous day that a lock to an electrical room had been removed. It was midwinter last year and we figured someone was trying to stay warm. As much as I want people less fortunate to get ahead any way they can, it was my job to make sure there wasn't someone occupying some spot on the property. So I go to check on the room. I walk up and notice the door is cracked ever so slightly. Pop my flashlight out and beam it in there. Now the room did exactly what it was made for without any budge room. There was maybe slightly less than a foot of space between the wall and the machines that were in there. Thinking it would be impossible for someone to be crammed in there I do a lazy scan and go to shut the door. As I'm walking down the staircase I hear a shuffling in there. It's late, there's nothing going on and I was newish to the city so seeing owls or big-ass rats was somewhat a thrill. Easily entertained I guess. So I go back up pop out the flashlight again but this time I crouch down to see the space beneath the machines. Sure enough I see some legs. I call out to whoever it was and tell them they need to vacate. They stay still for a long moment until they started to wriggle themselves out from the tight space. I stayed there cause procedure would be to escort off the block entirely. A woman pops out, looking rough as hell and starts muttering absolute nonsense. She's taking her time and it is pissing snow, so I start to get a little aggravated and tell her to hurry up. This woman turns to me, sticks her tongue out at me with her mouth gaping, broadens her stance and starts to dig in her crotch. She pulls out a warm totally unused tampon and throws it at me, hitting me in the jaw-neck area. Then proceeded to clamber away yelling something about murdering a molester. Worked as a office cleaner before COVID, 11 to 7 a.m. as a one-man team. One stormy-ass night, I was on the phone while working when my connection started to fade in and out. All of a sudden there is just a deafeningly loud shriek coming out my phone and the power goes out. Even the emergency lights. I remember looking out the window of the 10th and seeing the whole industrial park black. Nights make everything creepy. I stocked shelves at Toys R Us overnight for 5 years. One night, the entirety of 3 walls of board games, 5 shelves tall, 3 feet deep, fell to the floor. Everything. Except for a single Ouija board. We left early that night. I worked the midnight shift at a crappy little gas station and saw a lot of weird stuff. The guy who claimed he was going to hit it big on the lottery. He would come in with an old baseball card album filled with his past lottery tickets. Like 10 years worth of old tickets. Each week he had a new scheme. Using crystals to divine the numbers. Using previous winning number combinations and dividing by specific numbers, etc. The lady who would always pay in pennies for the pack of Camel Wide non-filter, soft pack only. The meth addict who passed out in his car after buying a 44 ounces big gulp and a bunch of those energy pills. The same person who once a month would steal a 12-pack, but because he was part of the manager's family, blind eyes were turned. One night during a floor set at Versus, we were throwing away trash and going in and out of the stock room, cleaning the floor, removing merchandise, counting registers, opening boxes, etc. We had music blaring and we're singing, goofing off while working, and all of a sudden some lady walks out to the register and wants to purchase her items, probably about 45 minutes after we closed and did the nightly routines of clearing out the fitting rooms, recovering the store, vacuuming. None of us knew she was there. None of us saw her. She wasn't in the store. She wasn't in the back. Not in the bathroom. Not under tables. We think she may have been hiding in the ceiling in the dressing room waiting for us to leave so she could rob the store, but since she realized we weren't leaving she thought it best to come out. It was the absolute scariest moment. I think there were 12 of us in the store that night, all over the place, and none of us saw her. What if she had a gun or a knife or something? She totally could have gone through our personal items and taking things. But she paid for random things and left. She acted like nothing out of the norm was going on. Years ago I was a night shift CNA for an assisted living facility. I had a resident that had a wild week. She didn't have dementia, Alzheimer's either, so it added more weirdness to this situation. It was about midnight when I was doing my rounds when she bursted out of her room holding her giant cross and looked white as a ghost. I asked her, "What's happening? Did you have a bad dream?" She replied after she caught her breath that were someone in her room telling her to get out. Now we have wanderers in our facility and I looked around in her room thinking one may have spooked her. I found nothing. She followed me around that night and didn't go off to bed until 4 a.m. I thought that was the last of it. I was wrong. The next night it happens again. She once again claims a man is in her room telling her to leave. Once again I check her room and find nothing. This is where things got really weird. One night when I was in the back helping a resident, my buzzer went off that the front door was open. I quickly finished up what I was doing and bolted to the front door. Those doors are locked at night. When I found the corner to the front office, I see her standing outside with the door wide open. She was looking at the sky in awe. I asked her what she was doing as it was 2 a.m. at this point, and she looked at me, put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Death is coming for X." I had to let him in. I coaxed her in the building with a cup of decaf coffee and some biscuits. She told me about the man in her room again and how he's making it difficult for her to sleep. Curiosity got the best of me and I asked if she can tell me what he looks like. I really don't believe in the paranormal. I feel like everything can be explained, but I can't explain how she accurately described a resident who lived in her room years ago. He was an angry man who didn't want to be in the facility in the first place and passed away after refusing his medication. He didn't like anyone in his room except a few CNAs. She even got his name right. Her family started getting concerned for her well-being and asked to have her transfer rooms. After she was moved down the hall, her nightmares stopped. I asked the other PCWs and CNAs if any of them mentioned anything about the previous resident in her old room. All have stated they didn't. A gorilla. I work at Walt Disney World in Florida, and more specifically I work at Animal Kingdom, which is half theme park, half zoo. Now, due to Disney's conservation efforts, they give the animals quite a bit of freedom. They are enclosed, but the enclosures are very large, and their sleep areas are well outside of guest view. It's actually a pretty great setup for the animals. We also don't confine them to their sleep areas at night. So I was working the graveyard shift, 10:30 p.m. to 8 a.m., and as I turn the corner to cross a bridge into the next area, I see a massive figure on the other side of the bridge. One of the gorillas had gotten out of their enclosure, and was just walking around the park. I nearly shat myself, as, if you know anything about gorillas, they can be pretty violent. I called it in to my boss and they told me that this happens sometimes and to just stay away from it and they will get the caretakers to come do their thing. Honestly, it was the craziest thing I've seen in my time there. I was leaving work at 11:30 the other night and I hit a fat ass with the door when I was leaving. Scared the shit out of both of us. Used to work overnight at Walmart. I was tasked to stock automotive that night, furthest corner of the store away from my other coworkers. One of the few times I wasn't listening to music with earbuds and so I would have heard if someone was near me messing with shit. The doll aisle is only a few feet away from where I'm stocking. I walked past the aisle coming from the warehouse and a doll on the opposite end of the aisle started crying. Scared the black off me. Never have been a believer in anything paranormal, ghost, scary stuff. Always thought this stuff was just BS. Until now. A couple weeks ago I started working graveyard shift at a plant that fills cylinders with different gases, oxygen, different medical gases, gas for welding, that sort of thing. During the shift it gets very dark and it's just me and two other guys. Working graveyard is different. It's like a different reality. A different dimension. Things are just different. Anyway, years and years ago there was an accident at the plant where 2 or 3 men lost their lives due to human error. Since then there have been huge safety updates to ensure it never happens again. Outside of our plant we have a bunker. It's where we store filled cylinders in case there is a leak or something. It's all outside. About once a week I see people who are not there. People who are not real. Sometimes when I'm on the forklift outside alone moving pallets I will see a man in the bunker watching me. I will drive to him thinking it's a co-worker but there is no one there. Sometimes I will see a man taking a break by leaning against the cylinders. Wearing the old style uniforms and looking like he's from old movie. They are two different men. Different builds. They are also 100% not my co-workers. I assume they are ghosts or spirits of the men who passed at the plant. They are calm and do not scare me. They are just watching us work. Taking breaks and relaxing. A co-worker who ate a bunch of bananas every single night. Not one, a whole bunch from the supermarket. Not really freaky, but definitely baffling. Would also regularly offer me banana despite me saying every time I'm allergic to them so no thanks. Just bizarre. He also had a drawer in his desk just stuffed full of staplers. Which I know doesn't sound that weird in an office but it was at least 20 staplers, none of which had staples in them. And I never saw him use one even once. Our printers had an automatic staple function so they weren't needed at all. Worked at a movie theater in high school. A few really messed up things happened there, but this one is freaky fun. The staff were, mostly, funny, quirky, wholesome kids, who didn't really drink or party, so we all made friends and would go out after shifts to hang at IHOP or somebody's house. One night I had a closing shift with some of my favorites, and most of us worked the opening shift the next morning. It's already past midnight and we're all hopped up on free Coke, a cola, so we went to L's house nearby to play flashlight tag. Teenagers don't need sleep. L lives right next to a nature preserve. We played around outside for a while, and when the sun started coming up we all took her dog for a walk in the preserve. It has a dirt road with trails off the sides. Right before we got to the trail we saw a dead possum in the road. The possum's head was mush but it was still moving. The dog ran up to sniff it but then came straight back to us. We sort of crept up to it and saw something crawling around inside its belly. The possum had died on impact, but it had babies in its pouch who were still alive and trying to stay warm. They were covered in sort of a yellow goo and smelled terrible. Really sad. Well, there's not much we can do, so we continued walking a loop through one of the trails. Everybody was quiet. When we got back to the road, the possum was still there and the babies were still alive. Long story short, I brought home a shoebox of baby possums at 6 a.m., gave them to my mom, and went off to work the morning shift a few hours later. Love you, Mom. I worked at the ArcLight, bougie movie theater, and I'm a night person, so I usually got the last shifts. Which meant I had to clear out every theater and then make sure all the trash bags hidden in the back hallway were clear and clean for the morning crew. The only freaky experience I had was hearing someone running throughout the hall, laughing and just being freaking weird. I thought it was a patron who was drunk, but it lasted for a good half hour, even though I had already called security to come escort them out. The security guards also heard the constant running footsteps and we only ever caught glimpses of the back of the person. Scared the shit out of us. Next day, I pull another night shift and see one of the guards who was on duty. He said they never found the guy and eventually the footsteps and laughing stopped. Still don't know what to make of it, but that was the only time anything like that ever happened. Not a strict nighttime worker, but working at night. I worked for my county morgue. I would retrieve a body and bring it to the morgue. My co-worker and I are talking as we are leaving the building. It's maybe 2 a.m. I am facing him, at the end of the long hallway. He is facing me, behind me a giant glass door. Just out of the corner of my eye, I see a black mass peek out of one of the autopsy suites and pop back in. I looked over his shoulder but shrugged it quickly before he said, "You saw that, right?" He had seen what I saw in the reflection of the glass door. We went down the hallway to find the building completely empty. When we leave, we are responsible for locking up. We hightailed it out of there, knowing damn well what we had just experienced. My company was a third-party contractor, so we did other forms of body removal, including removals for funeral homes. At this particular funeral home, I had heard stories of people having experiences here, but never any of my own. It's about 3 a.m. on this call, and I drop the body off in the embalming room. When we clean up our equipment, we spray it down with disinfectant spray and give it a quick wipe. For whatever reason, I felt impelled to treat this body with much more respect than others. I treated all bodies with respect. But for some reason I felt the need to go above and beyond for this soul. I took extra care of him, and clean extra thoroughly of my equipment. Things that we touch that aren't typically washed in our cleanup. I'm leaving the building, and as I am walking out of the door, a whisper in my ear says thank you. My heart drops as I know I have to turn around to lock the door behind me. No one was there, and no one lives in the funeral home. I was the only one there. I hightailed it out and refused to go there alone since. Edit, bonus story. At the same funeral home, there is a grandfather clock that does not go off at each hour every hour. It must be off by a couple minutes, because it's never on the hour, nor ever at the same minute in an hour, if you understand what I'm saying. And so, there I am, 3:43 a.m., and this clock goes bum and I lose my shit. I compose myself quickly, but it was before the thank you story and I was already waiting for a ghost encounter. I still hate that clock. I worked at a hotel with a huge banquet room for parties of 300 to 400 people. It was a weeknight and typically the hotel has low guest count and no people in those rooms, so we turn the lights off. I was walking through that room to cut through and saw the outline of a person leaning against the wall at the other end of the room. I thought it was another worker named Simone since he typically hung around that area since it connects to the pool to the hotel. I gave a head nod and said, "What's up?" No response. Weird. Went about my way and left the room. Came back 10 minutes later and saw the same shadow outline standing there against the wall and I said, "What's up?" And still no reply, so I began to walk over and it became clear it wasn't Simone. I turned and left the room, finding it weird that someone was just standing in the banquet room with barely any lights on and not responding. The next day I asked Simone if he was in the room yesterday and he said he wasn't working yesterday and neither was the other pool attendant. A strange looking fox, its face literally looked like it had a pixelated skull superimposed over the top of it. I work in an animal shelter and was out doing the morning dump checks, checking the perimeter for any dumped pets overnight, and had one of our resident dogs with me, who was absolutely oblivious to the strange looking fox perched on the wall opposite. I watched it for a while, half expecting the skull thing to disappear in the way that exhaustion-induced hallucinations do, but it didn't. It was shimmering in the moonlight. I eventually finished my checks and continued walking up the road and could still feel this thing's eyes burning into my back. I turned round and it was still there, watching. Our dog finished its morning toilet and I turned around to head back with this thing still watching me. Usually foxes run off at the sight of humans, but this one stayed. Obviously the logical explanation is it was sick with a skin condition giving the fur around the face a skull-like appearance, and it didn't run away because it was dying or too ill to move, and I'm generally not scared of foxes, but this thing terrified me and I'm still shuddering now at the thought of it, several years later. The other explanation I have: Shapeshifter. As a taxi driver in Glasgow I once watched Donatello, TMNT, kick the utter shit out of Super Mario while slutty Alice in Wonderland stood by shouting, "Fricking leave it, Tom. He's not fricking worth it." Best Halloween ever. I used to work night shift maintenance at a recycling plant. You'd be amazed at all the sex toys and porn people throw away. A bunch of dirty dildos flopping down conveyor belts and Polaroids of amateurs. I copied this from a previous post of mine. I used to work the overnight shift at a water treatment plant that first began treatment in the early 1920s. We were believed to be the oldest continuously operating plant in the state. I was the only one in the plant from 2300 to 0700. Many security features would inform me of someone's arrival outside of normal business hours. That said, here were my experiences. Sounds. Many times, while sitting at my desk, I would hear music playing softly from the next room. There was no radio speaker audio source in the room that would otherwise explain where the music was coming from. It was older music, big band jazz in genre. Too faint to actually make out a particular song or artist. There was no set time, although it seemed to happen the most between the hours of 0001 to 0100. Most of the time I would stand up from the desk to investigate. I would make it almost to the doorway and the music would stop. The last time this occurred, as I stood up, there was a very clear and close growling type of noise and the music stopped before I even walked away from the desk. Until then I had mostly attributed this to my mind playing tricks on me. When I first started the overnight shift, I heard conversations between a man and a woman while standing at the sink. The source seemed to be coming from the entryway, which was behind the sink. It was too faint to make out what the conversation was about, but there were two distinct voices. When I walked into the entryway, the conversation would stop. Again, this was when I had first started working overnight. I chalked it up to my mind messing with me. On numerous occasions, and quite frequently, doors would slam shut from areas of the plant that were unoccupied. Some of them could be from pressure changes or wind, but others had been held open with doorstops. Smells. There were a few instances of unexplained smells in the older portions of the plant. One night, for instance, walking into the main entryway from the filter galleries, there was a distinct smell of a woman's perfume as I stepped through the door. I walked about 5 feet into the entryway and then turned back through the door into filter gallery. The smell was gone. Going through the security records and cameras proved that I was the only one there. On 2 occasions I had an odor of rot decay while walking from the entryway to the bathroom area. The bathrooms were clean and, being the only one there, I can attest that there would be no cause for the odor coming from the bathroom. In any event, it wasn't a sewage smell, but rather a rotten flesh sort of an odor. Again, I would walk through the door maybe once or twice and the smell will be gone. Sightings. I, personally, had only had one unexplained sighting. Again, in the oldest portion of the plant. I was standing outside in the parking lot when I saw a shadow moving across the oldest of the filter galleries. It was large and darker than a shadow should be, and moved quickly. Being that security was one of my job functions, I had to investigate. After searching from the top floor to the bottom, I concluded that I was the only one there. There were large windows in the filter gallery, which is how I was able to see the figure in the first place, but there was no light source that I could come up with to explain what I saw. Coworkers had claimed to see figures standing in the windows on the 2nd floor, offices, or 3rd floor, storage, areas of the plant. I never saw anything personally, although I won't discredit what they experienced, as they aren't people that would pull pranks. Lastly, there were numerous times that lights had been turned on off without explanation. This mainly occurred on the 3rd floor, storage, area in the oldest portion of the plant. While making rounds, I would look into the windows to see that lights were turned on upstairs, but were already off when I walk up to shut them off. Back in the day I was a security guard. My job was to watch the corporate pool and park at night. This was out in the boonies. Every hour I had to walk the perimeter and key this clock thing. It could get spooky at times. One night I was walking the perimeter and it felt like something was watching me from the woods. I thought it was my imagination. But I couldn't get it out of my head. My second trip around I was walking and I heard something in the woods. Something big. I was scared. So much so I left work a couple hours early. No one ever checked in. The next day when I was checking in at the main warehouse at the factory, they asked if I saw the cow. It turns out a cow got free from a nearby farm and wandered into the park. I'm pretty sure I was stalked by a dairy cow. Thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed the video.